Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking time to join today's webinar. Apologies for the delay and some technical issues. It tends to happen time to time in most of from these webinars. But we have a rare privilege of having Tim Tyler to come from ICA to give us a talk. I think it's a rare privilege to have him on board today. If you remember, those of you who were here last year, he presented just about the same time, June 2020, on financial crime updates. I think it's good to have him on board once again to give us another talk on developing soft skills within AML compliance KYC. And some of us might think that those are not important skills, but skills like leadership, communication, negotiation skills, all those are very good emotional intelligence skills which you can harness to develop your career further, even if you are not within KYC or AML, but those are very, very important skill sets. So we're going to have Tim introduce himself briefly and follow up with the presentation. But prior to then, just one or two housekeeping rules. Please ensure you keep your phone, your mics on mute at all times until, except you want to ask a question, you got to ask the question on the chat button below, or you then unmute and you ask a question politely to Tim, and he'll be very more than happy to answer your question. So in the meantime, welcome Tim once again, and over to you, Tim.
Okay, John, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to come back again. Delighted to join you. Even with the football going on at the moment, I'm going to speak to the gorilla in the room, and I'm quite sure that some of us will have the football in the background, and that's all right. If I lose everyone, it may be because, I don't know, England has scored a goal, or maybe Germany, and that's all right as well. I quite entirely understand. So thank you for joining us and for joining me, and I'm very grateful for your time and for your interest. In a moment, I'll introduce what I'm going to talk about over the next hour or so, but before I do, can I introduce myself? Now, I'll do this very briefly because I expect some we may have met last year, and I think I introduced myself at that time, so I'm not going to labour this, but very briefly, I'm currently the head of qualifications for the International Compliance Association, or the ICA. Now, the ICA is a global organisation. We deliver qualifications from certificate to postgraduate diploma all over the world, and so far in about 140 different countries. We have offices in the UK, in Dubai, and in Singapore. My role is to lead the formal qualifications, both in terms of their design development, but also in their delivery. So prior to joining the ICA, I was head of anti-money laundering for the Gambling Commission. You'll know that the gambling industry is fairly liberal within the UK, and my role was to manage the money laundering and terrorist financing risk across it. Prior to that, I worked for 30 years in law enforcement, early on as an investigator in the context of CID and financial crime in particular, fraud and corruption. Towards the end of that law enforcement career, I was working at a more strategic level, very often still in financial crime. So, for instance, I headed up and formed the Proceeds of Crime Operational Command within the Serious Organised Crime Agency. And my final role was as the head of the UK International Crime Bureau, working within the National Crime Agency. So my role included working with my teams. We managed all the incoming and outgoing criminal and fugitive inquiries on behalf of the United Kingdom. Okay, so that's a little bit about myself. I'm going to share my screen for the purposes of today's presentation. I expect we're all quite familiar with that, but can I say that it's set out in a number of slides, but we don't have to stick to the slides. if you'd like to digress, if you have things that you'd like to ask or challenge or just simply observe, it would be fantastic to hear from you. It's so much more interesting if we can make this a dialogue rather than just a monologue with me speaking. So I have slides. They're kind of useful, but we don't have to follow them. And it may be that I skip over some towards the end if time runs short or if we choose to go in a different direction. So please raise your questions, your thoughts, your observations at any time. Even if it's just to say, I think you're wrong. Let's talk about it, because it's good to be challenged. Some of the things that I'm going to be talking about are maybe a little bit provocative. Maybe there's scope for you to challenge me. You may have different views, and that's good. That's worthwhile. And I do hope we have the opportunity to properly debate them. Right now, though, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to set my PowerPoint to sharing, and with luck you can now see the PowerPoint in presentation mode. So Julie, you've put in no, my mistake. So let's make a start. What am I going to talk about over the next hour or so? Well, there are 3 discrete parts to what I'd like to share. They are linked, but they are discrete and they stand alone to a certain extent. There is a common thread that runs through them, and that is leadership. And I hope this will become clearer over the next few minutes. But nonetheless, I'm going to start by talking about soft skills in compliance. So, of course, by soft skills, we're talking about those skills that are about the way in which we interact with others, the way in which we interact with problems and challenges in detail. And of course, I feel I'm stating the obvious when I recognize that compliance professionals need those skills in addition to technical skills and understanding. The question, of course, is, well, which skills and how do we develop them? And I hope over the first part of this evening to address that question, to, I hope, share some thoughts, maybe to hear your thoughts around which soft skills are important. The second thing I'd like to do is think about leadership, the importance of leadership within compliance, and the nature of leadership. There are many different models that we can refer to for effective leadership. And I'd like to share one particular model with you. It's one that I've been particularly attracted to and I've used throughout much of my career, and I found it very, very helpful. And then finally, we're going to look slightly separately. So we're going to change direction very briefly and look at the global approach to anti-money laundering. And I'm going to ask the question, is it working? Now, the reason for this is because it gives us an opportunity to think about why. Why is it working, or why is it not working? And in particular, I'd like to talk about leadership in that context. So there is a common thread that runs through this, and that is the question of leadership. It's something that I believe is desperately needed within compliance. And I hope in an hour's time, you may share that view and you may see why it's so important. Or, of course, you may challenge me, and that's good as well. So that's an overview of what we're going to cover. We start with soft skills, and I'm going to start by asking you a question. So I expect some of us will have used Slido before. It's brilliantly simple, And what I'm going to invite you to do, if you're not completely distracted by the football, is to go to the website slido.com. Now, if you go there, there's a space where you can input a hash code. And if you input the hash code like Minds, then you'll see that there is a question. The first question, which I'm going to activate in a moment, and it asks you to identify 6 soft skills relevant to compliance. So this, I think, is a really good place to start. And that is sharing together what we see as the key soft skills. And then I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And then when we've done that, I'm going to share the output. And I'm just going to activate the poll. So it's now ready for you. If you go to slido.com, input that hash code, you will see that there is a question waiting for you. And if you could please respond to it by typing in just single words for those soft skills. Skills like, I don't know, communication, all sorts of different skills that are required. And you're invited to identify 6 of them, or as many as you're able to identify. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. I'm going to stop sharing whilst I do that. And I hope that makes sufficient sense. Please let me know if it doesn't.
Yeah, just trying to get in myself into it.
Okay, good. It should be straightforward, but
so we're going to slido.com.
Yes.
Okay. Then we're into the code like Minds. Okay.
And then you'll see at the top, joining as a participant, and then you're invited to put a hash code, and the hash code is like Minds.
I can't seem to get in.
Are you struggling? Is that?
Yeah.
So, well, I'm glad. Thank you for your feedback. So, are you struggling to get on the site or to use the hash code? Actually, it looks like the site may have renamed. I'm going to put the address in the chat function, and you might want to just cut and paste it into your browser. So try that. Thank you for your patience. I hope it's going to be worthwhile. I think it will, because it'd be really interesting to see collectively what we see as the most important soft skills. So you'll see that there's, when you go to the website, at the top of the page, there is space for you to add your code. And your code is like Minds.
And the code is like Minds.
Yes. So maybe this isn't going to work, and I apologize if it isn't. I'm not sure why. It should be active. Okay.
I'm not sure if
in that case, I'm so sorry. No, I got it wrong. Soft skills. The code is soft skills. I've got that up. Try soft skills. You'll find that does work. I don't know why it's made life more difficult, but there you are. So you can see, identify 6 soft skills relevant to compliance. There's the question. And so it's soft skills, and you should immediately find yourself presented with that question. Let me know if there's a problem. And once again, thank you for your patience in this.
Yeah, soft skills is correct, yeah.
So as we are typing that, and hopefully you can plug in a few soft skills, a handful. I see that so far 2 people have responded. And just whilst you're doing that, in case you don't already know, then the score is 0-0 at the moment, still 0-0 after 60 minutes. 3 people now. 3 people have contributed, so thank you for that. And again, as many skills as you're able to identify. So I'm going to wait 1 more minute whilst you do this. Some really interesting observations, actually. "30 more seconds, and then we'll share what you've shown." Wow, some really interesting observations. So 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to close the poll, if I may. Okay, so I'm going to close it now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to capture the results and paste them into a slide so everyone can see. So bearing with me, and I'm just going to paste them into a slide and then open that up to you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and we'll see what the outcome from this is. So I think this is absolutely fascinating, and it's worth just pausing to reflect for a few moments what we collectively see as the key skills. So communication, of course, stands out. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes' time. Attention to detail, interesting, that stands out. Team player, time management, negotiation, patience. Each of those have been identified multiple times. But going further, emotional intelligence, really, really good point. That's about being able to read, to understand individuals, to make sense of sometimes complex situations. Integrity. Wow, that's so important, isn't it? Logical. I particularly liked, I don't know who it was, but I'm looking for it now, but meritocracy, there we are, next to patience. That's vital, isn't it? The importance of promoting and using people according to their skills, and ensuring that you advance people across an organization that display the right skills and attitude rather than for any other reason. So much that we can take from this, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. What I'd like to do, though, is share with you a different set of metrics around soft skills in compliance. I visited 12 websites. When I was researching this, I visited 12 websites that separately spoke about this issue of soft skills within compliance. They included Standard Chartered Bank, Deloitte, several other global banks, and a number of other leading compliance organizations to try and understand what it was that they identified as the key soft skills. So I found that really useful. I'm just going to share the outcome of that research. So I did something quite similar. I plugged in the outcome from that research into a word cloud, and this was the result. So these are the skills identified by those 12 organizations, including Deloitte and Standard Chartered and those that I mentioned. And it's interesting, isn't it? Straight away, we can see that there's overlap between what you've shared and what we see here. And problem solving, communication, attention to detail, integrity, networking, I think, was there. The ability to handle pressure. All of these, I think, you identified. And again, it's useful to have these in mind, recognizing for us to be successful, to be effective as compliance professionals, these are the sorts of skills that we need to have and to develop. So I'm just going to very briefly consider one or two of them and to explore why they're so important. So attention to detail, that's something that was picked up by ourselves, but also by those 12 businesses. Why is that important in the compliance profession? Well, I expect many of us are thinking, that's my day job. That's all I do is work through, sift through detail. And of course, that detail is so important. If we look at the case of Westpac, our Australian bank, recently fined $920 million because of a failure, a catastrophic failure to monitor transactions. But the reason for that failure was simply a tiny coding error. This coding error went unnoticed for a period of time, and it led to this huge failure in terms of transaction monitoring and to this fine. I think illustrating the importance of that attention to detail. We need, as compliance professionals, the ability to interrogate data, people, the ability to interpret situations, to make sense of sometimes complex legislation and regulatory requirements. A second soft skill that we again identified is problem solving. And once again, I'm sure many of us are thinking, well, of course, that is my role. That's changed, hasn't it, over the last 20 years or so. 20 years ago, compliance was seen as very much a gateway activity. In other words, did it permit certain things to take place, or was it going to stop them? Did those activities comply with relevant policy and procedures? And the role of compliance was to ensure that. Now, of course, compliance is at the center of successful businesses. It's about more than saying yes and no. It's about finding solutions. It's about problem solving to create solutions rather than just stopping relevant activity from taking place. It involves understanding the issues, listening, hearing the concerns within a business, and creating solutions in real time. A third skill, and again, we picked up on this, and that, of course, is communication. Communication that's both verbal and written. And of course, and this was separately identified within those skills that you picked up, and that is listening. The importance of being aware of what's going on, listening to the mood music, listening to the concerns across a business, where there may be potential red flags. But more than that, the ability to communicate, to persuade people, to change their minds, to communicate requirements, maybe legal or regulatory requirements that need to be interpreted and shared across a business. But there's one more skill which was mentioned in the analysis from those 12 businesses. I'm not sure if we collectively identified it as well, but that is agility. And this, I feel, is particularly important. Over the next 10 years or so, it's reasonable to anticipate that the compliance profession is going to fundamentally change. Not just compliance, but much of business, perhaps most of business, is going to change as we see the impact of new disruptive technologies. Technologies like artificial intelligence and the blockchain. They mean that roles that we're currently doing are likely to be done by computers in the future. So we're going to have to adapt and to change. I was talking to a senior lead within a global bank recently about their recruiting procedures. And she mentioned that one of the things they recruited for was specifically agility, recognizing this very issue, the importance of being able to adapt and change mid-career. So that, I feel, again, is an important soft skill that we need to have. So that's a quick overview of those skills. It's worth just briefly considering what does that mean for us and how do we develop the relevant skills. So I'm going to just suggest 4 or 5 things that may or may not be useful. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is we need to be clear which skills we need, which skills. And those, of course, are the relevant skills to our current roles and those that we may aspire to in the future. We may look, for instance, at role profiles, perhaps talk to managers, other people that are active in those roles to understand what it is that we need to develop to be effective. So the first thing is to know which skills. The second is to assess our ability in them. There may be some skills that we're really strong in. It's likely that there will be, but perhaps 1 or 2 where we aren't as strong. These are relative weaknesses. We can perhaps reflect on our performance, maybe talk to our line manager or others around us, just to get a sense of our ability in some of the key areas. Then, of course, we need to be clear, what does good look like? What is good practice? What are we aspiring to in these areas? And there are so many ways that we can do that. One might be to look at our post profile again, because that will set out performance criteria. It might also be to talk to our manager, maybe to talk to others, maybe to research. And there's so much resource available on the internet to help us to understand what good looks like in this space. And we've got the opportunity to use, those of us that are in work, have the opportunity to use our performance and development systems in order to identify discrete goals and to make a difference. But this, finally, I think is the single most important thing, perhaps by far. We need to push the envelope, push the boundaries, look for opportunities to do new things, to test yourself, to try things out. If something that you're fearful of is maybe giving presentations, or maybe it's analytical activity, then find an opportunity to do it. Build those skills, perhaps turn that weakness into a strength. And the for me, I think the best way to do that is by actually pushing yourself into new territory. So I'm going to pause there. I've jumped through a handful of different issues in the context of soft skills. Any questions or thoughts from anyone before we move on to think about leadership? And for those that are not watching the football, I can tell you that it is now 1-0 to England. So I'm surprised that you haven't disappeared off altogether in the celebrations. But let's
Tim,
hope.
I have a question for you, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like when you said seeking new experiences and trying something out that you've not done before. I think it's one area that people tend to struggle with. One of the areas people struggle with is presentation. I'm still learning, trying to develop my presentation skills. How do we go around enhancing or developing these skills if your organization is not giving you that opportunity to be able to do those things?
Yeah, and John, it's a very relevant and important question. And there's no simple answer, there's no silver bullet, but can I suggest a handful of considerations? The first is be creative. So you might actually just be, you've got a team meeting coming up, and rather than the normal sort of chaos that team meetings normally entail, I don't know if you would agree with me, but that's certainly my experience, you could actually say, you know what, next week, I'd just like to start the meeting with a 5-minute presentation, just something small and different. You may find people respond really well to that. Secondly, you can look to do the same thing on a bigger stage within your business and create those opportunities. So rather than wait to be asked, actually proactively look for opportunities. So if we're working in CDD, for instance, at the second line, and you notice that there's a particular team working in the first line that don't really understand CDD, then why don't you approach the manager for that team to say, look, could you just spare 20 minutes in your next team meeting for me to come along and talk about the key elements of CDD? Because I see that there's something that you're not very strong on. So there, I think you can create opportunities proactively, getting people's faces. But ultimately, can I say something else? And that is, if you're working in a business that values you, if you're working in a business where you are seen as an important resource, where people are willing to invest in you, then this should not be a problem. If you approach your line manager to say, look, during the next 12 months, I'm just looking for 3 opportunities to give a presentation, then I would expect that individual to take that very seriously and look to support you in that. And if it doesn't happen, if you find yourself working in an organization where that just isn't the case and that you're being held down, maybe there's an opportunity for you to look to find an organization that does support you in what you're aspiring to. Of course, that's not easy. That requires courage and risk. But if we want to develop and if we want to move on to senior levels or levels with more responsibility, that's sometimes what we need to do. John, does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. I just remembered my current role. I've been there for we're going to 2 years now. And I've never really I've done presentation, but it's not as to a large number of people. And my current role is more on the front office and business development. And I was thrown into the deep end to one of my first tests my manager gave to me, head of my department, was to do a presentation on a particular topic which I'm responsible for, a line of business called supply chain finance, and to train many people, to train the RMs, train risk, many other people. So I did and it was a lot. It was inundating, challenging, but I think after that webinar, I think, gave me a lot of confidence to do more. I didn't find it any longer challenging to be able to do presentations or to do slides. Before, I used to struggle. I used to say, oh my God, this is just too much. How do you do all the slides? After a while, it became part and parcel of me, so to speak.
That's good.
I think it's a saying that practice makes perfect. I think by the time I did, because of that, I had the way to do a few other ones also with senior management, with other people, and it really helped. And also, I got the opportunity to be invited for some of these conferences. The last one I did was a trade and export conference. I was invited to be one of the panel speaker, something that ordinarily I would have said no. It was inundating for me, but I think I had a go at it, and I did the best I could.
John, that's fantastic. And what you've done, of course, is far more and far better than I can describe. You've actually turned this into practice. And I think that illustrates so clearly that sometimes you just have to get on and do it. So thank you for sharing that, John. Julie, you've asked for a little bit more insight around agility. So when I talk about agility, what is it that we're talking about? Thank you for the question, and perhaps I wasn't at all clear, and there's an opportunity for me to just explain now. So when I joined the police, I was pretty confident of what I would be doing for the next 30 years. And those around me were confident. There was clarity in role, there was very little change, and you could map your career with some certainty. That, I think, has been lost. I don't know if you would agree with me, but if you try and anticipate where will you be in 5 and 10 years' time, it's more difficult, isn't it? Those of us working in customer due diligence may be, well, their role will be simply absorbed by the latest generation of artificial intelligence. So they will need to do something different. And that, for me, is the agility. It's the agility to use the same skills, but in a different context. And so, Abhilash, please forgive me if I've not pronounced your name correctly. You've suggested being adapted to change, flexible. Exactly. It's exactly that. And it's a challenge. It's something that is so important to us. Okay, I've only got a quarter of an hour left, so I'm not going to speak to the final part of today's subject. So I'm not going to be talking about anti-money laundering at a global level. I'm just now going to think about leadership with you. Much better for us to talk about those things that you're interested in. And I hope this is useful because I want to move on to think about the nature of leadership. Now, I was going to ask you to add in your thoughts about leadership. What are the relevant skills? But we're not going to do that because it was a bit of a catastrophe last time. It took so long. I think you were so very patient with me. And we're running a little bit short of time. But if I was to ask you now, just quietly, what do you see as the nature of leadership? What does it involve? Is it clear to you? Are you clear about what it means to be a leader? How do you demonstrate those skills and what difference you make? Now, I suggest that this is an area that isn't straightforward. So Nates Amaran, to influence others. Of course, that's absolutely vital, isn't it? As part of the role of a leader. If they can't influence others, then they're not leading. They're not, because no one's following them, they're not leading. So I entirely agree. But what I'd like to do, and so Abhilash, so being transparent, leading by example. Yes, that's one of the key requirements of any senior manager and board level responsibility is to demonstrate the right behaviors, the right activities in decision making. So that is so important. What I'd like to do, though, is to share with you a model of leadership that maybe you haven't encountered before, that I found incredibly useful in my career. So I first encountered this. It was presented to me by Professor Keith Grint, who derived this model. This was about 15 years ago, and it was in a joint strategic leadership course that I undertook with the military at RAF Shrivenham. And Professor Grint presented his theory of leadership, and I find it incredibly useful. So I'd just like to share that with you now. And I hope it will make sense, and maybe there'll be value to you. I should say, though, that there are many models, many different ways of understanding leadership, and this is just one, albeit one that I think is very relevant to the compliance profession today. So the focus for this isn't so much about the soft skills that we have. It isn't so much about identifying that we need to be good at communication, good at negotiation, good in your judgment. Now, the focus is on the other side of the coin. And so Professor Grint starts by considering the types of challenges that we face. And he identifies 3 different types. And then he relates that to leadership. The first is critical. So this is a critical problem. And of course, I encountered this quite a lot in my police career. These are problems that are immediate and urgent. If you come into the office on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock and none of the computers are working, you have a critical problem. This isn't the time to form a committee, to think about how we're going to address this, to build a collaborative approach. This is a time for decision-making and direction. And the style of leadership is command. So you're looking for people that will grip the situation, will command people around them, and tell them what to do in order to resolve this critical problem. That, I think, is relatively straightforward. I think we probably all recognize that. Then we come to another type of problem. This is described as tame. Now, by tame, Professor Grint means the type of problem that we have encountered before. We know it, we understand it, and so we know exactly what to do to respond to it. So you see a picture there of a call center. They face all sorts of problems in dealing with customers, potential customers, but all of them have been experienced before. And they've got policy and procedures and processes that govern what they do to ensure that the outcome is right. And when you face a tame problem, you can be confident that if you do the right things, if you follow the right steps, then you can control the outcome. It's tame. And the approach that we take is described as elegant. It's elegant because you can control it. It is simple. It is straightforward. You know what the outcome will be, and it's the role of a manager to manage resources, to manage people and situations, to respond to tame problems. Does that make sense? Is this landing? Something that I'm sure we all recognize, but it contrasts with the final type of challenge. Before we come on to that, very briefly, elegant solutions are known, logical, predictable, structured, and you can predict exactly what the outcome will be. But then we come to the final type of problem, and it's described as wicked. Now, wicked problems are new. We haven't seen them before. There isn't a tried and tested route to resolve them. There isn't a manual or guidance that will tell us what to do. We need to try different things. This is challenging, and the solutions tend to be clumsy. What I mean by that is there aren't simple, elegant, structured, predictable ways of resolving wicked problems. You're never quite sure, as you try and fix the problem, whether what you do will work or not, because it hasn't been done before. And this is the role of the leader, according to Professor Grint. This is where we need to demonstrate leadership qualities in order to resolve these wicked problems. So, pausing for a moment, what do we mean by clumsy solutions? How do we solve wicked problems? Well, it involves innovation, trying new things, trial and error. It involves collaboration, working with others across a business or maybe across several businesses. It involves taking risks, and sometimes the solutions are complex. They involve a range of different simultaneous activities. And of course, there's that risk. And so the qualities of the leader, in order to discharge this, well, they need vision. They need to see how to potentially address this challenge or this opportunity. They need courage to take risks. They need empathy so that they can understand people around them and build that collaborative approach. They need integrity. And this is important because on occasions, it won't work. On occasions, what they try will simply fail, and they need the integrity and the ability to simply acknowledge that and to change direction. And they need to be a little bit streetwise as well. The reason they need to be streetwise is because not everyone will support them. There will be those that want to see them fail. It involves taking risks, and so you might fail, but you still need to carry on. And to do that, you need to understand people and situations. You need to be streetwise in order to manage them to the appropriate ends. Does that make sense? Can I just pause there for a moment? Does that make sense in theory? And I'd just like to finish by giving two examples that I hope illustrate this quite well. Any thoughts from anyone? Is that making sense? No? Shall I give you some examples and then perhaps I'll ask you this question again? John, thank you. So, yeah, you said yes, it does in the chat function. So that's encouraging. That's good to hear. So what I'd like to do is just give you Stanley, yes, so, and Julie, some examples. So I'm going to give you two case studies, and I'm going to summarize them very, very briefly. And I hope it'll be clear from the two what we mean by this style of leadership. So the first is something that I encountered in my career when I took over a department that was in crisis. The department was about 180 people. The backlogs were overwhelming. The quality was very poor and being criticized. It actually led to the death of two people. The unions had become involved. The levels of stress were very, very high. And I was given a mandate to not only bring this under control, but reduce the headcount by 50 in a period of about 2 years. Now, I did this and I was able to meet all of those goals, but I did it by simply applying tried and tested routines and methods. So what I did was I went right back to basics to understand what is our mission. What are we doing that is outside of our core mission? And then we stopped doing those things. And then I went through all the activity with my colleagues to unpack it and understand it. I saw, for instance, that some cases were being handled by 7 different people before anything was done on them. And so all I did was change the process so that the first person to receive it was starting to add value immediately. Then I changed my senior management team because they were negative. They were working against what I was trying to do, and that's maybe where a little bit of street wisdom came in. But it was a tame problem. It may have sounded appalling, and it did, believe me. It was incredibly stressful for me when I took it on. But it was just a tame problem because all I needed to do was good, straightforward management practice. So for me, I was just acting as a manager. I hope that makes sense. And I'd like to contrast it with a second case study. This was again, yeah, John, thank you. So it was just simply management skills. It was straightforward. And I'm quite sure that any of us would have done the same thing in those circumstances. The second case study, though, I faced a different challenge. And in this instance, I and my teams identified a money launderer that was operating on the other side of the world. I won't say which country it was, but you could probably guess. This money launderer was harming the UK. It later transpired that he'd laundered 2.3 billion US dollars over the previous 18 months. He was incredibly well networked and had sophisticated operations that spanned the globe in order to launder these funds. There was no way that I could take him down within the United Kingdom because he never came to the United Kingdom, but his network was harming us. But it was also harming many other countries. And so what I was able to do is bring some people around me to start to build our understanding of what this individual was doing. So brilliant. So John, it's exactly what you said there, working with the right people who held the same vision. I identified 15 different operations here in the UK that all had a link to this individual and to this network. And I agreed with them that they would share key intelligence. So we've now started to pool our intelligence. Still not enough. I approached the authorities in that country and they said, well, we can't do anything until you actually give us the evidence. So then I expanded the reach and I identified and worked with 6 other countries. So the United States, Singapore, Hong Kong, Italy, Australia, and this country, which I'm not going to name because they don't come out of it particularly well. Now, in doing that, we were able to share our intelligence. We were able to identify where the evidence was. And then we were able to share that with the country where this individual was operating. And then we struck. And that was fantastic because simultaneously, we were able to coordinate arrests and search of premises in Australia, in the United States, in this country. And we were able to lock everyone up and eventually we were able to prosecute them. So that, I think, is an example of leadership rather than management because I had to try different things. It had never been done before where you had 15 UK operations and 6 overseas, all being brought under the same umbrella. We'd not been able to negotiate with that country to actually take an enforcement activity against the individuals. That was the first time as well. And of course, we were able to do that because we had this shared goal and vision. So that for me is a useful juxtaposition. On the one hand, the role for me of the leader is about taking the risk, doing different things, but it's also about recognizing when sometimes you just need to do the basics. You don't need to be hugely innovative. You just need to get the basics right. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I feel like I'm blowing my own trumpet rather too much. And I'm going to stop there and stop sharing because my time is up. I've covered, or we've covered, quite a lot of ground. We've talked about the importance of soft skills. We talked about some in particular, such as communication, attention to detail, problem solving, and agility. And we've looked at the importance of leadership and management skills within that. So, Julie, you've asked, would case study 2 be critical? No, I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because using Professor Grint's terminology, a critical problem is an immediate, urgent one, a fire. The computers across the entire business crashing. This just requires immediate prescriptive direction. You do this, you do this, you do this, rather than building a collaborative response. I hope that makes sense. Perhaps I didn't explain it terribly well. But it contrasts with a wicked.
Sorry, what?
So, sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, so, what I meant was that when you explained, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
The case study that you explained, the second one, the global one, would that be referred as a critical?
I don't think so. And the reason for that was because it was a long-term thing. It went on for years and years. And the only way that we could actually take that network down was by collaborating, working together, and so on. And a critical problem, according to this methodology, is one which is immediate, it's urgent. You have to move straight away. So it's not about being more important or less important, it's just about the immediacy. A critical problem is immediate, it's urgent. Does that help, Julie? It is just a useful paradigm. It's a useful way of understanding it. So no, a wicked problem is one that is new, that we haven't experienced before, that it's challenging. You don't know immediately how you're going to solve it. You need to try different things. A critical problem is urgent, it's immediate. There's a fire, the server's gone down. Something needs to happen very quickly. Whereas a wicked problem is one that's just new. COVID is a wicked problem. Dealing with COVID, there is no silver bullet. There is no right and wrong way. There's just politicians doing their best. We hope doing their best. So Abhilash, you said it starts with setting up smart and real goals and steps. I absolutely agree with you, but sometimes you may need to push the boat. You may need to try different things. If what you're facing is a new type of problem that hasn't been encountered before, you can't be confident that you'll solve it by taking certain steps. All you can do is try new things. Now, let me finish by saying this, and I'm mindful I've run over time, but when you look at compliance around the world, and in particular, if you look at anti-money laundering, the way in which regulators have responded to money laundering, I suggest, is by treating it as if it is a tame problem. So what do I mean by that? Regulators are saying, you need to follow these prescriptive rules. You need to do this, report suspicion. You need to follow the 40 recommendations. Here we are setting out, these are the steps you must take in order to solve money laundering. But it's not solving it. And the reality is that money laundering is getting worse. And as I'm sure many of us are familiar, the global approach to money laundering is seen as having simply failed. And one of the reasons that I believe it is failed is because we're treating it like a tame problem. We're treating it as if we know it, as if the 40 recommendations are enough. If you follow the 40 recommendations, you stop money laundering. Well, the truth is it doesn't work like that. We need to treat it a little bit more like a wicked problem. Be willing to try different things. FATF, I think, is waking up to this, is trying different approaches. But regulators around the world and big global banks and others that are influential in this space, I suggest, need the courage to try different things rather than the same old tried and tested and failed solutions. So that was what I was going to touch upon, but we rather ran out of time. Does that make sense to anyone? Is that coherent?
Yes, it does.
Abhilash, thank you. John, thank you. I'm brilliant. Okay, I've got to stop there. I'm mindful, though, I'm encroaching on your time. I'm hugely grateful that you're willing to share this time with me and for your attention and for your interest. I do hope it's been useful, and I'm going to hand back to John at this point.
Yes. So thanks, Tim, once again for the presentation. I think it's very vital that I think it's something that we often to overlook. That soft skills, a piece of work. I think it's not just at work. I think in everything we do, basically, in everywhere we go, I think that soft skill is actually very important, and that will help us to relate better or communicate better to do better in every task or every adventure or every project that we've been assigned to embark on, whether at work or at home or charity or anything, basically. I think we should have some questions. If anyone has any question they want to ask, I think it's a good time. Let's have the next 5-10 minutes. Let's have some questions as regards harnessing the soft skills and some in relation to what Tim just talked about. You feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you could feel free to unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question. I want to make that as interactive as possible. Share your experiences, basically, the challenges you go through as regards these soft skills in your current organizations, and see how I think you're in a good place for someone to advise you how to do better. I think that would be great. So I will kick this off with another question. A friend of mine told me certain things that it didn't sound too good. I think, because some of us are, how to put it now, we're not born here, so we have a different accent. Some of us from India, from Africa, from different parts of the world, basically, and we have our own accent. And sometimes people find it difficult to understand us. And someone told me that in his organization, his superior, one of his managers told him that he doesn't like the way he speaks. Why don't you talk like somebody else, who has the British accent? So, and they were asking me, what do I think the person should do who was told that? I felt as a tough one. If it was me, all hell might break loose. But nevertheless, it's not me. But I think I want to be as practical as possible, that these things happen on a day-to-day basis at place of work. People might not identify with you because of certain characters or the way you speak and all that. And we try to do the best we can. That's why I mentioned about emotional intelligence, understanding people, ability to relate with people better. That intelligence is quite important. We face a difficult terrain every day at work because of the restrictions. But how do you think we could navigate, despite we have some, I won't say limitations, but yes, in a way, there could be limitations, or people want to limit us because of certain things they don't like about us. How do we harness those soft skills to excel above those limitations?
So how do I answer a question like that in the space of just a few minutes? And I'm mindful that it's possible that I'm the only white person in this room. So, and that's relevant. And, I think that needs to be acknowledged. But can I just suggest a few things? The first thing is that if they are suggesting that because of the way that you speak, they have a problem with you, then as long as you are clear, and that's on us, isn't it? We need to make sure that we're clear in the way that we speak. As long as it's clear, then anything else is, and I'm stating the obvious, but I'm going to state it anyway, is out of order. It's wrong. There is no space for that. And it is not our problem. It is the problem of the individual that has said that and is demonstrating that. So that doesn't really help very much in terms of figuring out how you respond to it. But I think it's important to recognize that is fundamentally wrong and there's no space for it. So what do you do then if you're in that position? And I'm going to suggest that you've got several options. One is, and always, first of all, just make sure you are clear, please, that people can understand you. That is important. That's clear. That's an important part of our role. But once you're clear on that, then you've got the opportunity to think about, well, who is this individual and what level of influence do they have on my career? Because they're obviously demonstrating some kind of bias, maybe prejudice, maybe worse, maybe racist behavior. So if they are in a position of influence in your career, then you've got choices. One is you could take the line of building a bridge, bringing that person on side and working with them to get past that prejudice. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm saying it's an option. Another option is, at the opposite extreme, is to whistleblow. And most of us will have whistleblowing facilities where we can anonymously report that an individual is displaying this behavior. Now, if you're the only person that speaks with that accent in your business, it may become quite quickly clear that it was you that blew the whistle. So you have to think that through and the implications of that, but I would seriously consider it. Thirdly, I would say, if the individual isn't just acting alone, but there is a culture of this, and look, I'm going to suggest that I hope that that's the exception rather than the rule. I hope that you don't routinely encounter this. 20 years ago, yes, but not today. Perhaps I'm wrong, and I've not been in your shoes to see it firsthand, but I would hope it's the exception rather than the rule. But if you do see that there's a culture of it, then I would suggest that that is not somewhere you want to work, that you need to look for your options to build a career elsewhere. And in the meantime, you might want to blow a whistle, and you may even want to start gathering evidence. And you'll know what I mean by that. So write things down, time and date, record what was said, precisely what was said, so that if you're challenged, you're able to demonstrate and back up your experience. There's much more we could talk about contained in this issue, though. It's not a straightforward one. And I'm just sorry that you've encountered that here in the UK. There is no space for it. Would anybody else like to add to that? Maybe your experience or how you've responded in similar circumstances?
Let me share my experience. I think I work in places whereby, well, I wouldn't say people didn't understand me, and maybe people do not identify with me. But what I've done was I keep my head down, but I try to excel in everything I do. Such a way that if there is people don't like you, they will have to come to you for something. If you make yourself, well, maybe nobody's indispensable, but almost indispensable in your role. You're good at what you do. People that don't seem to identify with you, once they need something in that particular area, they will have to come back to you. You know, when I was working Bank of America, there are some people that never spoke with me. There was a time I was I was getting to the office. One of the ladies asked me, "Can I see your badge?" A staff asked me, "Can I see my badge?" To say, hang on a minute, what's going on? Why are you asking for my badge? You know, but I didn't let that get to me. I put myself in a position whereby if you want to ask me concerning any area, if there's someone talk about trade finance or within implementation, within that world of implementation, they will have to come to John. There's no how, there's no other person that will give you that is the most proficient in that area, but you must talk to me, you know. And so I found people who wanted advice and help in one area, they will have to talk to me. So in a way, it helped me to build some rapport with some people who seem to have been distant.
Yeah, that's clever. That's really clever.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe is true, not just in the particular circumstances that you've described, John, but that can be true for anyone new into a business where they need to establish themselves. It's just perhaps much more severe and challenging in the way that you've described. But can I say one more thing? And here really I'm speaking personally and just offering a view personally rather than representing the ICA. But can I say that people don't respect weakness? They respect strength. And so sometimes you just need to courteously, professionally stand your ground in the way that you've described, John. You need to be willing to say, you know what, you shouldn't have said that. Not becoming emotional, not you know, sort of bringing the roof down, but just challenging, standing our ground. That's incredibly powerful when we can do that. It's about doing it appropriately. That's the challenge, and also not becoming too emotional. And that is really tough. And I've not walked in your shoes, so I don't understand what you've experienced. And I can imagine it'd be very difficult to be emotional because so much baggage maybe is brought to those conversations.
Another question would be, how do you show your soft skills at the point of maybe securing a new role? You want to go for an interview, and one of the things they look out for is some of your soft skills. How do you interview just an hour or something time, but how do you demonstrate that in an interview setting, which will help your ability to secure a new role or a new job?
So any interview is a partnership between you and the interviewers. So they need to draw the best from you. That's a responsibility on them, but there's a responsibility on you to give your best. So there's always this partnership going on in any interview. Nonetheless, there's so much opportunity to demonstrate the right skills. One thing I would say to answer your question is bring evidence. So I've just shared with you 2 case studies that might be relevant to an interview. So if they were asking me, what would you do in order to change the culture within the business in order to generate improvements? I might actually start by saying, before I answer that, can I share with you what I've done in the past and the way in which I've done exactly what you've asked, changing the culture, brought improvements in a real life situation. That's something that I have done. Now, let me tell you how I'd approach it here. So it's not just theoretical. We're actually providing evidence, and evidence is really powerful. Moving away from just sort of thinking about it, well, I think I might do this or I might do that, to actually say, no, I've done this. I've demonstrated those skills already. So that's the first thing. The second thing is confidence and backing yourself in whatever context that is. Having the willingness to challenge, to not be afraid to say, this is a strength. I would do this. This needs to be confronted. Or this solution here may not be perfect, but it's the best in the circumstances. And of course, in doing that, you're demonstrating soft skills. So you're demonstrating the ability to think, to problem solve, to communicate effectively, to pay attention to detail. You can actually do it live in front of them, demonstrating those skills. And you can talk about it and talk about how you've perhaps in the past demonstrated them. But it's a big question. Interview skills, interview tactics. There's so much more we could talk about, I suggest, John. But
so can we bring like evidence to an interview panel? Have something like some form of evidence, because that might be something that could be asked. You could provide some evidence and have it handy with you.
Absolutely.
All right.
So when I prepare for an interview, I aim to identify and be very clear about maybe 10 pieces of evidence, maybe 10. And the strength is not just knowing that those things happened, but getting the numbers down as well. Knowing that there were 6 people, 6 countries I worked with, 15 operations in the UK, knowing that it was $2.3 billion. If you have those numbers, you're credible. It's convincing. And even if you aren't asked for evidence, even if they say, well, what difference are you going to make? That's not to say you can't use it. So you can still bring that to say, well, look, do you mind, before I answer that question, can I just say how I've done exactly the same thing previously? How I've demonstrated the skills that you're looking for. And then you can pick any of the 10 that you've prepared that's most appropriate to the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's very powerful, I suggest, evidence, but also recognizing that you need to be clear on what they're looking for and weave that into your responses. So if they're looking for someone with attention to detail that's going to be dealing with complex, nuanced issues, then that's the sort of evidence you want to bring. So you're not talking about broad, wide-ranging, visionary stuff. You're talking about how you've paid attention to detail and how you've made a difference in those roles. I feel I'm stating the obvious, though, and I'm sure that many in this room could speak from their own experience in this way as well.
Yeah. Someone asked the question in the forum. It's about, can ransomware be considered as a wicked problem?
Yes, new role jargon. What I'd say is don't leave it too long before you challenge it, because then you'll be. So let me give you a scenario. You've started a new role and you're now 2-3 months in and people talk about XYZ and you've got no idea. What is this thing? The acronym XYZ, you've got no idea. The trouble is, if you've left it too long, you can't ask. Because if you ask, they're thinking, well, how have you got to this far without knowing what XYZ is? So I would say, ask, what do you mean by that particular phrase or that acronym or this thing? Can you just point me in the right direction? I don't know what you're talking about. And I can't answer your question or contribute to the debate until I do understand what it is you're talking about. So the first thing is, don't be afraid to challenge. Really, really important. And in terms of taking down minutes, well, there's so many ways in which we can do that. For me, I look for keywords, key issues, but I also challenge what's going on around me in my own mind. So I'm questioning, what are we talking about? Why does it matter? Why does this person bring up that issue? Is it because of the role that they have and the responsibilities? Or is there something else that's going on beneath the surface? So I'm constantly asking myself, what on earth's going on? Trying to get beneath the surface to make sense of it. But gosh, again, that's a big question. How do you embrace a new role? What I would say initially, first thing is challenge. Just say, I don't know what you're talking about. So you just have to explain that. Would you mind? Or if not, can you explain it? Can you just point me to where I will find after the meeting what you're talking about? I hope that helps, Julie. I'm not sure if that's quite what you had in mind, but there you are.
Let's just take one more last question. Someone asked the question, Natis Saman, can ransomware be considered
oh, yes.
a wicked problem?
Absolutely. It is a wicked problem. Absolutely. You could argue that there are certain things that, if you follow certain steps, you can make sure that you're not victim to ransomware. So if you update your system routinely, if you apply the patches, in a timely way, it should mean that you don't get caught out by ransomware. So in that sense, it's tame, because we know we just need to get antivirus software. We need to be careful about the way in which we interact with our computer. But at a higher level, at a national level, absolutely it's a wicked problem, because, well, I could show you now how easy it is to generate this malware. We could go online now and do it together to generate ransomware, which we could then send out. It doesn't require a degree in computer sciences. It's relatively straightforward. The reality, of course, is that we'll do that, and most antivirus software will stop it. So it becomes more challenging. But the reality is the world is full of potential criminals that are willing to use these tools. And so it is a wicked problem. It's not going to stop anytime soon. And as soon as you plug one gap, the criminals are going to generate another way of coming around it.
Yeah.
So at that level, it's a wicked problem.
Yeah, I think 2020 saw the increase in ransomware, even attacking various GP surgeries. I think holding their data of their medical records until they pay certain amount. I think this year it got even worse, if I'm not mistaken. I think there was an oil company in the US that I think hacked into their system and demanded billions, I think, to be paid in cryptocurrency. I think, but eventually they were able to get around that. So I think it's gotten more and more complex these days. Something just to bear in mind.
Absolutely, John. I'm just sharing my screen as we speak. These are lifetime attacks that are going on right now.
Really?
Right now. So, and you can see there's been 62 million attacks today. And what we can do is we can map where it's taking place. There are different colors used, and those colors represent different types of attack, and some of them are ransomware attacks. And as you can see, it's prolific. And if we go to another website, it'll give you a different perspective on this. This is a Kaspersky website. And here we can see a map of the world. And again, these are taking place, it's not quite so clear on this, but they're taking place in real time all around the world, these attacks. You can actually click on individual countries and it will tell you the nature of the attacks. Russia currently is the #1 most attacked country. So this is a prolific problem. I'm going to stop sharing now because that's not the subject that we were supposed to be talking about this evening, but it does illustrate why this is a wicked problem.
Okay, thank you very much, team, once again.
Okay, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for facilitating this once again for us. I think it's very enlightening. I think we're going to go back and see how we could develop our soft skills even further in our place of work. And so hopefully we could invite you again next year sometime to share something different.
Don't know. I think
it was a pleasure.
I'm not sure.
It was a pleasure.
But it is an absolute pleasure joining with you.
Can I ask a question, please? A quick one, please.
Sure.
Please. Sorry about this. Just that there's a lady that had a group of us, about 100 or so, and I think someone got hold of our phone. Someone in a different country, I'll just say it, someone in Nigeria got hold of our phone. So the person now has called everybody on that link to dial in, to click on a link and dial in. So, and what I did was to delete my name from that group. So the point is that right now, has our phones been hacked, or what do we have to do? Because the person has called everybody on that group. Sorry, everybody in that group rather, sorry.
Yeah. And there isn't a simple answer, I'm afraid, Julie, and it could be a number of things. It sounds like something called a worm. A worm is self-replicating and can continue to generate messages and attacks across many different email addresses or telephone numbers. And typically it's accessed via address books. But I think the best thing you could do is change everything that you can to ensure that this is blocked, is prevented from taking place. And if it continues, then maybe take advice, maybe speak to the police, although there's no guarantee, candidly, or speak to an IT expert. So you may have IT experts working within your business. You might just chat them up, talk to them. They'll give you some insight to what's going on. And I expect they'll have a better knowledge than I do around that particular threat.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry I haven't helped very much, Julie. But
No, you have helped, I'm sure. But if it's a WhatsApp, I think you can authenticate. There's anything you can do to, I think there's this two-step authentication just to protect yourself, just to ensure that you don't get hacked into your phone as well. So thank you once again, team. It's always a pleasure to have you on board. It's very enlightening to have you all the time. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. This webinar has been put together by Like Minds. We are an African networking forum in the diaspora. If you want to know a bit more about Like Minds, we aim at manpower development. Just a few of us within the African diaspora, we support ourselves through manpower development. So take a look at our website, likemindsuk.com. And if you want a little bit more, feel free to touch base with me, and yeah, we'll go from there. So thank you once again, team, and thanks for everyone for joining. I think we peaked at 32, 33. I think we are still at that same number. So it's the first time I actually got to a webinar whereby we peaked at the same number and it did not go down. It is still the same. So really, thank you so much. That tells you the quality of the presentation. That this volume is 100%. So thanks, team. On behalf of Like Minds, thanks to ICA for having you on board and having to do this webinar for us. And hopefully we'll see you once again in the nearest future. Maybe when the lockdown is over fully, we could have a cup of coffee or something and catch up over dinner or something, or have some drinks together. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Yes, guys.
Thanks, John.
Sarah.
Hello, hi, good evening.
Take care.
Yeah, welcome. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. You?
Yeah, I'm doing great as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so